Tikina rā ko te pūtake o ngā kōrero o te wānanga tikina ke rā ko te hautapu o ngā ariki i kauwhata Te Arawa e tāne te wānanga ki runga ki enei taura, ki runga ki enei tauira. A kia koi rā te mata punenga, mai angi te mata pui hoiho, whano, whano, tau mai te Maori, a haumi e hui e, tā iki e. A kei ngā mātā waka, huhua ko pai mai kiuta, a tēnā here here a mai, nau mai ki tā tātou kaupapa ki te tumu o ngā kōrero i tēnei pōnei. Nei au ka mihi ki a koutou, a mō koutou kua pai mai ki tā tātou kaupapa. E mārama ake ai tātou ki ngā kōrero o te wā, o tira kua tai mai ki te kai, i te kai māro, kei ngā ringa, o tō tātou pū kōrero i tēnei pō. No reira tēnā koutou, o tira tēnā koutou me o koutou kāwai whakapapa. Iau ka mihi ki a koutou, me o koutou maunga, me o koutou awa, me o koutou marae, o koutou iwi. Mai pēhea hoki e kore ai, tangihia o tātou mate. Ko ngā mate kei runga i a koutou, ko ngā mate kei runga i a tātou i tēnei pōnei. Tēnei ka tangi, ka auhi te ngākau, kia rātou, e takoto mai rā i te mātāotao, e takoto mai rā i te anuanu, i te poho o tātou whare. Haere atu rā. Ko te tai o te pō kia rātou, ko te tai o te Aotea, kia tātou e tau nei, kia ora tātou. Tēnā nō rā tātou ko hoki mai nei, ki te whakarongo, ki te nui o te mātauranga, kei a koe e Tame, ka huripua ki a koe i tēnei wā, kia mōhio ai te iwi, te hunga kaori te mōhio pēr. Ko wait no hea, hea rā tātou kaupapa, tēnā koe e taku huanga.
Tēnā koe te tuakana tuatahi me mihi ki a koe, nau e whitikina te taukāia ki te wāhi ngaro. Hoki wairu mai ki a tāua, o tira tātou. Nau anō i whakatau mai a tātou, hei whakawhānaki i tēnei kaupapa. Nō reira neira ka mihi ki a koe te tuakana. Ko tāku nei, he hako ki te ngahere. Nō reira ko Te Arawa waka tēnei, mai make tū, whai ngā tapua o ngā toiroirangi, tai atu ki Makatiti, ko Ngāti Tarāwhai tēnei, huri kau atu ki tōku iwi, Ngāti Pikiao, tēnā tātou. Hoki ki taku kōrero, he mea tēnei, he hako ki te ngahere, me ki te ngahe mātauranga. Koera tātou i te pōnei, he kai ngā kai māro, o te ngahere, o te mātauranga, hei hāpai i tō tātou nei tai ao. So, kia ora everyone. I'll get into our kaupapa in a sec, but yeah, Ranginui, back to you. Do you want to do anything before we kick into it, or just?
Hi, Pukapata. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everybody who've taken the time out of your day to join our webinar tonight. Ko Ngāti Pikiao tēnei mihi atu nei, ko Ngāti Ranginui, Ngāti Whakaua anō hoki, here to more or less facilitate our kōrero and help Tame in dialogue as he has kindly accepted to share his kaupapa rangahau with us tonight. Mehe mea he pāta, if you've got any questions, there is an option for you at the bottom of the screen to share your pātai, and there will be an opportunity for me to share these pātai with Tame at the conclusion of our webinar tonight. Nō reira, mehe mea he pātai, tukua mai. And I will be sure to ask the pātai at the end of our webinar tonight. Hewa anō, ko tērā mō tēnei wā. That's enough pahu from my end. Everybody's here to listen to the star of the show. Nō reira, tēnā koe e Tame.
Well, bro, I'd probably start with my pātai would be, where's the hunting spot, seeing as you're always catching meat, bruh. You need to share those with us. Hoi anō, am I able to share screen? Yep. All right. You can hear me all right, bro? Ka pai. Tēnā tātou, like I said, no Te Arawa waka tēnei, koe rā pōku iwi, Ngāti Tarāwhai, Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Ngārara nui, tapu i ka Ngāti Whakaue, tai tonu atu ki Ngāti Rua nui o Taranaki. So before I start, I was pretty blessed. I grew up in Rotorua. My parents, my uncles, my aunties, my cousins, yeah, they sort of helped me get to where I am. A lot of them started, people probably know Tihini Grant. He was one of my early inspirations for where I am now. He would take us out to the ngahere and point out trees and name it. I talked to some of my other cousins who were fortunate enough to have some of that knowledge passed to them, and they don't remember it. They're like, oh, nah, it didn't really interest me. But for me, I soaked it up like a sponge. I loved that stuff. Yeah, any spare chance I get, I'd love to be out in the bush learning about those aspects. So that kind of followed through. I went to university, studied biology, and then all through university, I worked in the Department of Conservation, finished university, and went straight into goat culling and possum trapping. Nō reira, koera tōku whiako, oku whanonga. It's all been around that, so being in the bush. But in the last, I spent 12 or so years in pest control. I'm still in pest control, but at one stage I decided to go back to school. So a lot of the kōrero today, we will be talking about my sort of journey, learning a lot of stuff, going back to kura. And I see we are recording this, which is cool. I am doing my PhD at the moment in this kaupapa, so a lot of this stuff is stuff in my PhD, and so my supervisor, Maria Barge, will probably boot my ass for this because she doesn't want me sharing any of the juicy stuff. She wants me to keep it until I can publish it. Engari, me pēha rā e nei kōrero nei mātauranga hei whai kāinga if we can't share it amongst our whānau. So if you are interested in learning more, please hono mai, but I'll talk about that in the end.
I better take you to the good hunting spots then, my cousin.
That's the one, bro. Give me the good ones. So tuataiake, he kohinga kōrero e nei. So a lot of this stuff is stuff that's either been passed to me, given to me, shared with me. In some cases, I've connected dots, but most common one is it's kōrero tuku iho. It's our mātauranga. It's now understanding. So that's my dad and my son. So it is intergenerational, a lot of the stuff. Oh, hoki atu, sorry. So what am I talking about? I should have even said that from the start. A Te Ao Māori approach to reforming pest management. So as I said before, my background's in pest management. And I kept asking the question, how can we do this in a more Māori way? And what is a more Māori way? Who can be more Māori, or how does it even look? So I started asking all these crazy questions. And a lot of it stemmed from stuff like 1080. The 1080 debate was the big one. And people were saying, oh, 1080 is against our tikanga. And I'm like, cool, how does that look? Or who says? And there was no answers out there. So I started trying to find answers in that space. And then, as I said, my supervisor, Maria Barge, who's also a whanaunga from Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Tarāwhai, she said, hey, some of this stuff could be a good PhD topic. Nāwai, koe rā au e whai taua tohu ina nei. So, what would a Te Ao Māori pest management approach look like? And like I said, it's te kohinga kōrero e nei. So big shout outs to everyone that's helped me. I think the bro Tame might be listening. Tame, yourself, Ranginui, all of Te Arawa waka, my whānau, even the kohanga. So te kohanga maunga ko hungahunga in Papakura, even the tamariki there have helped me in some of this journey. So still a long way to go. But he kohinga kōrero. Let's get into it. Right. The definition of a pest is a biological organism that has a negative impact on what a community values. So that's pretty boring and pretty mundane. But there's so much things you can pick apart in defining a pest. So negative impact, it's doing something we don't want it to do. But when we start looking at a community and what they value, that's where we get into a lot of sticky points. Who's the community? Is it that whānau? Is it the hapu? Is it the iwi? Is it everyone living around that maunga? Is it the people who whakapapa to that maunga? So again, we can just ask a million questions just on that one thing, one kupu within that meaning, community. And then value, well, everyone values something different. And for instance, we've got deer there. I've got a picture of deer. So are deer a pest? Some would argue, nah, it feeds our whānau, so it's a he taonga te deer. Others would say, nah, ka kai ia i aku rongoa. The deer eat all the rongoa in the taonga species, so it's a pest. That's why the category of pest is really hard. It's super hard to say that's a pest, so we're going to control it. So before you can even look at pest control, you've got to figure out, is it a pest or not? And then when we look at some other things, I've got possum skins down there. We've got to remember that we might say it's a pest, but it's a taonga to other people. And so if we're telling the government, you've got to protect our taonga species, and we're off shooting, killing, and trapping the taonga species of other peoples, especially indigenous peoples. How do we reconcile that? How do we kia tau pai ai tērā whakaaro ki roto ia ngai tāua te Māori? Yeah, so we've got to start having conversations internationally before we set off on that journey. Put Pohutu kaua there. Pohutu kaua is a pest over in South Africa. It's ripping up their roads and everything, but mātua Te Arawa, I te tainga mai o te waka o Te Arawa, au koera tētahi o ngā tohu. It's a huge taonga. So, yeah, before I could even get into looking at some of the cool, juicy stuff, I had to figure out what is a pest. So, yeah, I'm still trying to figure that one out. Anyway, Te Ao Māori approach. So for this kōrero, I just thought I'd keep it pretty simple and just talk about 4 key themes and just a quick little kōrero or story for each of those themes. So we got our philosophies, which is kind of what I just talked about. Those are the philosophies of pest management. So what is a pest? Who decides the pest? How do we decide? Then we'll look at some of the kawa and tikanga and ēnei kōrero ka tū ko te kawa ko te kauaiarunga, so celestial law, and tikanga, man law. Kia kore ai tātou e pōhehe. And kōrero tuku iho, that's probably more of the cool stories or the stuff we can learn just by examining stuff like our reo, ngā pūrāka, ngā pakiwaitara. And that's my son who comes out trapping with me with a Norway rat. At one stage, I was doing a lot of research around kiore, the kiore Māori, and reading some of the stories that made me want to eat some pākeke kiore because they made it sound so nice and fat. But yeah, I just couldn't convince my wife Kahurangi to let us eat Norway or ship rats. But that's a pretty juicy rat if you ask me. Anyway, philosophies. Like I said, it's about the meanings of pest control, but if we start looking at our tupuna, they didn't really have any stories around pest controls, specific to this world. Like they didn't go out and kill something for the sake of it. Te nui o te wā nā te kawa I arahina I rātou kia whakamate tētahi kararehe mo te pokanoa. There was normally some kōrero around coming from our atua. So for us in Te Arawa, we know that traps were invented by Tūmatauenga. During the Battle of Pairangi, he said he was going to get revenge on his tuakana taina, so he got invented traps and spears and fish hooks and whatnot. And so there's some aspects where they talk about him being the god of innovation as well, because he invented all this stuff. So if we're going to want to achieve something like predator-free 2050, killing all of the eradicating rats, possums and stoats from New Zealand by 2050, yeah, we will need the traps of Tūmatauenga and we will need his innovation. So if we're going to go down this path of Māori pest management, koera pia te āhua katimata. We start with our atua, with Tūmatauenga, he can guide us. But that being said, if we flip over to his taina, Rongo, the god of peace, we also see that he carries out pest control. So, oh man, Rangi's going to kick my ass for this. Rangi Mātāmua. We know, I'm trying to remember the names, Whānui, Rongo Maui stole the kumara from Whānui. I won't even say the names. The kumara came to Earth through theft. And basically, I think it is Whānui, the older sibling, sent down the 4 aruhe to kill the kumara as revenge. So kumara being the children of Rongo, or Rongo protecting them. Yeah, so there is a time and a place where we invoke Rongo to protect the kumara by killing these aruhe. Anuhe, which yeah, is pest control 101, basically getting rid of biological organisms that's having a negative impact on our kumara. So we could look at that as well. Do we invoke rongo in some cases? And lastly, and this kōrero was given to me by Tūmai Cassidy from Otako, Whiro. As we know, Whiro sent his children to attack Tane. And so if we look at my world, my pest management world, all I'm doing is protecting the children of Tane from attacks from other outside
Te hone ko raru tō hononga, bro. Ai kore I e roa e hoa mai, he's just sent through a message saying that his computer just went AWOL. However, he's just rebooting his rorohiko. Heoi anō, kia mahara tonu tātou e hoa mai. If you've got any pātai, be sure to put them down, just to jot them down, and we'll go over them towards the end there, whether it's about the pūrākau and whatnot. Okay, a tātou tēnā. Ka pai, nau mai hoki mai. Kua ngū koe, bro.
Sorry about that, everyone. Ki te pai?
Ai, ki te pai. Have you still got the share option, bro, at the bottom of your thing for your?
Ka pai, so like get straight back into it. So I'm not sure where we got to.
Talking about sometimes invoking rongo, bro. Sometimes invoking rongo for pest control management.
Yeah. So we can either look to tumatauenga, rongo, or a combination of both. But a recent theory that was given to me by Mai Cassidy of Otago was Whiro. And as we know, Whiro sent his children to attack Tane. And for my mahi, that's all I'm doing is protecting the children of Tane from attack of outsiders. So when Mai suggested that theory to me, it rang true for me and it felt nice. So yeah, if we want to design a Maori pest management approach, for me, that koera te orokohanga, te timatanga o tēnei whakaaro, is look to our atua and how can they start the conversation. Next one is our kawa. And a lot of, as I have these conversations in pākeke circles, some of them, to be honest, some people are like, oh, it just seems like black magic, or it just seems like fairy tales and stories. How's this going to help us? Now, if we look at our kawa around chopping a tree down, so the story goes, take all the workers go into the forest, choose the tree, do their karakia, say their karakia, then they start chipping away at it, they take the bark and they cook a kumara on it, and all the workers eat the kumara. So, a wairua nei, ko hono rātou ki te wāhi ngaro, ko whitikina te rangi ki te whenua. A tina nei, all the workers have had some kumara, and they're, they're ready to get into some hard mahi. But conjecture tells us that the karakia and the process, in some cases they're tapping on the rākau while they're doing the karakia, the frequency or the oro of the kai karakia is enough to scare away the insects from the tree as he's tapping on it. The tohunga's tapping on it, scares the insects away. Then when they light the fire, it scares away the birds. So by following our kawa, chopping that tree down has less of an ecological impact than if we were to just go do it willy-nilly. So we've started to explore more of that around, our tupuna didn't just make things up for the sake of it. There was practical reasons for why they did things. Now, everyone knows the story that if we play music to a tree, it grows healthier. Couple that with another concept or what they've proven, that if you play the sounds of healthy coral to dying coral, the dying coral grows back healthier. So Te Tira Whakamātaki are looking at combining kaupapa like that, where they can look at playing the sounds of healthy forests back to dying forests. So if you want to learn more about that, follow us at Te Tira Whakamātaki, and my links and stuff at the bottom. But exploring those things. And then the other thing is our tupuna, when back in the day, they got to New Zealand, they started writing karakia, waiata, and they used inspirations from around them. So they wrote these waiata with oro and frequencies and wavelengths and all that stuff in healthy ecosystems. So with that in mind, we now have a sound timestamp of what a healthy forest sounded like. And if we compare it to now, we know, oh, there's a lot of frequencies missing. So with that in mind, we know how we can get to a healthy state is to get those frequencies back. So puera au e meana ke te pirangia ki te whakahoki te reo motuhake ki te ngahere. Tōna taumata. So moving on, tikanga. This is a nice little cool experiment that I did at home. If we look at some of our traditional food gathering methods, that can inform our pest management as well. That can inform our pest management. So I know that in February, we've got the kihi coming out of their shells, and there were stories around, so the kihi come out of the ground, latch onto a tree, and then they come out of their shell and they're left with the anga on the tree and the kihi flies off. But there was kōrero around kiore getting into those before the kihi got away and eating them, getting its protein fix. So I started doing trapping around the trees where there was a lot of kihi, rather than just trapping how I normally would, which is you just follow a straight line or a fence line or anything. I started targeting the trees where the kihi were. And then when they finished up, the kahikatea started up. So I was like, oh, I'll just move my traps to the kahikatea tree and use the berries rather than flour. And, I normally use flour on my possum traps, flour and icing sugar. I thought I'll just use a bit of flour and some kahikatea berries. And then when that month finished, it was miro trees, miro season. So I started trying to find miro trees and doing the same for that. There wasn't enough miro trees around, so I was grabbing the berries as much as I could, mushing it up and putting it over my traps. After this quick little experiment over 3 months, I had a 2% increase in traps. So while it might not seem like much, 2% doesn't seem like a huge increase in, in catch rates. That's with, I got saved money on my lures, so I didn't have to worry about buying flour and icing sugar. I got to save energy. I didn't have to carry the stuff around. I just found the trees that worked for me. And he mea whakarauora I ngā mātauranga ngā tikanga o Nehera. So I got to help bring back some knowledge that, could have possibly just sat in a book for a while. So I got to play around with that stuff. And then I subsequently found out there's a lot of people who are doing this, whether they know it or not. Whether they've learned it from a book or from kōrero tukuiho, or it's just practical in some cases. They just, it makes sense to follow that sort of stuff. Which led me down another rabbit hole, and, or I should say a kiore hole, but the ara kiore. Ara kiore are where you put your traps, your kiore traps on the hill. You put them out in so-and-so place. And if I owned an ara kiore, I could only pass it on to my daughter. So only she could inherit that wahi or those ara. And so when it came time for land disputes, they used that in the Maori land courts of who inherited the ara kiore could only go to a wahine. But the theory goes, so not the theory, we've seen in some cases that some of those ara are exactly where contemporary possum trappers would put their possum trap lines. So our tupuna were mapping out hills with the best pest management approach possible hundreds and hundreds of years before we even come along and decide to do possum control. So I want to really dive into some of that stuff and see how onto it they were, or they could guide us rather than us reinventing the wheel or reinventing a map. They've already got it there for us.
Was it the contours of the land, bro, that dictated how those were placed in particular? Like, so is that one of the parallels that you might have seen?
Nā mea katoa, bro. Nā tohu katoa. So in some cases, it would be the contour. It makes sense to walk up that hill. In other cases, it would be the best trees are in this space. It's the sunny side. It's the there's a bit of a dip in the hill, so that's a nice little warm spot for kiore to run to and eat. All those tohu katoa, bro, indicated, our tupuna didn't just put things willy-nilly. They made sure it was the best bang for buck. And so for us, we want to carry 40 kgs with the possum traps. You want to make sure you get the best bang for buck and you put it in the right place. So,
of course,
perhaps our tupuna can inform us.
Yeah.
And last one, this is right up your alley, bro, is, what can our kōrero tuku iho tell us? So I just mentioned there before about the arakiore and how that can inform our possum trapping lines or our rat trapping lines. But even some of our other practices like the pākeke kai, how they raised it up on stilts. There's another practice of where they would bury fern fronds, or they'd put fern fronds in to lay their kumara pits, and that's so the kiore couldn't dig under and come up through. And that was a piece of gold information that Raimona Enia gave to me. He just casually mentioned it one time that, oh yeah, I've heard stories. And so I said to my dad, and he goes, oh yeah, we did it. We don't know why we did it, but we were told to do it. So there's a lot of stories where people say, if you prompt them, it comes to mind, like, oh, that's right. But because it was just a way of life for them. And that's probably the best or the most interesting thing is, just asking those questions. In our reo, like our whakatauki, he whā tāwhara ki te hiki ko tāmuri ki tai, that talks about the kia plant there and how precious it is. And anyone who's seen those fruit know that rats go hard on them. And so if you set a trap around those areas, especially with something sweet, you're bound to catch some rats or possums. But our tupuna used to tie the leaves up in a knot so nothing could get in. And so they knew ways to protect those kai. And with that in mind, how can we align our trapping to make sure we're sort of, protecting those taonga, but also catching the pests as well. But also looking at some of our other kōrero, what are the stories, what are the narratives, what are the whakatauki that we can use. And the last one is, while it is cool for me, I find it fascinating to look backwards. Let's say we come up with a new cool way to trap rats that are specific to our ngahere or trap possums that are specific to our maunga. How can we pass that on to the next generation, to my son and his children there on after? And here I am looking at our kōrero tuku iho. So how can we create kōrero tuku iho now that can be tuku iho to them? Excuse my fob Maori, but yeah. So that's why, rather than just talking to the same old possum trappers and whatnot, I'm keen to chat to artists and weavers and carvers and composers. And how can we put stuff in place now that will, capture this knowledge and build off it? So if anyone fits those criteria and would love to have a chat with me, please get in touch with me. And koera, so that's me. But if you want to know more, there's our website, Te Tira Whakamātaki, or ttw.nz. It's a not-for-profit organisation that helps Maori communities protect their environment. And there's my email if anyone wants to email me. Like I said, this stuff is, I still haven't published it, and it's still a long way to go before I even publish it. So at the moment, it's just me out on the hill playing around and practicing this stuff. But if anyone would like to do more with me or would like to have a wānanga, please get in touch. And I will stop sharing. How do I... mate.
Ka pai. Kia ora pai, tēnā koe i era kōrero me te hira o tō kaupapa hau, bro. Just one of the pātai that's popped up is when thinking about pests, are you also considering regional natives in New Zealand? For example, pohutukawa technically being a pest in Wellington.
Ooh, that's a good pātai. Because a lot of people think that pest is introduced. It's new to the area or new to the region. But if we went off that theory, kuri was introduced, karaka, pūkeko. So for me, it has a negative impact. But it depends on the community you're talking about as well, and what they value. See, hawks are considered a pest. Kahu is considered a pest by farmers because it has impact on their sheep and whatnot. So farmers are allowed to shoot them by law. But he tapu rawa e rā mahi, like you'd never catch our tupuna killing a kahu for the sake of it. So it depends on the community. For us in Te Arawa, the shag kawo was considered a pest by the government back in the turn of the century. So they put a bounty on it. Said, everyone do your part of pest control and kill the shag. A lot of Te Arawa wouldn't do it. They wouldn't touch it because the shag gave away, alerted our tupuna on Makoia to hongi hika coming over. So, and it was able to save a few lives. So they didn't want to go, go to war with some kaitiaki just because Pākeke government said, it's a pest because it's eating our trout that we introduced to your lakes that are eating your coda. So
Yes.
super complex, caught it all in, and people say, oh, is this a pest? Is that a pest? It depends on the community, bro.
Has that issue been one that's quite hard to tackle? Because I think I feel that the hononga to some pests as opposed to other are a little different. For example, the kōrero around pest trapping and deer trapping would be different because of how because we eat it, really, because it's a source of kai. And so I suppose that the kaupapa is quite contentious often.
Yes, bro. And I was in a hui one time in a wharenui, and a kuia got up and said, yep, deer are a pest, they're eating our rongoa. And a guy got up and humbly said, oh, sorry, whaia, it might be eating your rongoa, but for us, it's putting kai on the table. And if that makes me colonise for saying it, oh, well. But he was, if we start with the premise that our culture is just stuck in time, like you can't change it, oh, kararu tātou. Whereas if we keep thinking our culture can adapt and can change, that opens up a whole different conversation. So because I'm trying to be a researcher, figuring out what it means, I'm not allowed to have a say. So I can't say, oh, this is a pest, that's a pest. So I keep going back to, okay, te ahua tonu o te kai pātai meki.
Only reason why I asked is because somebody said to me, with the deer being a pest, it will interact differently with introduced species as I would with other animals like a possum or some sort of or some other pests like that. And I said, well, I think my relationship with a deer, a trout, and is different to that of a possum or a mouse or a kiore. Nā te mea e harai te kai, kio. It may have been once upon a time, but again, as we've progressed, I suppose we haven't really needed to stew mice in recent years. You got to be pretty hungry to want to go and have a kiore when you can go and get a $2 pie at the dairy. Heo no, ane te te hia tu pātai, bro. I kōrero koe mo te kia. I kōrero koe mo te kia, he wāhi pai tēnei, he mau te kiore, nā te rekanga o te kia, he wāhi pai anō mo tēnei. So ko te kia te wa, is it a preferred place to catch our kiore, or is there
probably, it depends, because sometimes kia grow in the middle of, they grow in big, large clumps, so it's super hard to get in there. But, so it depends on the bush and the time, and to be honest, most of them are gone by the time I've ever seen them. I've only seen a handful in my life, and that photo I just put up, that was from a wānanga just gone when we crossed Hakarimata. And both Tuma and I were like, yo, we haven't seen one of these in real life. Well, I was a kid when I ate one with Uncle Mitamohi. So for us in trapping, while we see those places, we know, oh, yeah, it's sweet. And we see the evidence of the rats being there and smashing them, or the possums in some cases. We know, set some traps around this area, but truth be told, they're just everywhere.
Te te hea tu pātai, bro, nā Charlene, pests according to or determined by who? Have you had experience facilitating this kōrero within Māori and Māori and non-Māori communities?
Yes, good pātai. And yes, I have. So we never, quite often, so for a while before I was with Te Tira Whakamataki, I ran a pest trapping business, and a lot of my mahi was, I'd get called, people say, oh, we want to do pest control on our maunga, on our ngahere, te mea. And so I was like, cool, why? What's the reason? So we'd start right back then of, what's the pest? What impact is it having? in some places, pests were having no impact at all. So I was like, oh, if you just want to kill something, cool. That's a bit weird, but let's find a reason first. Or what are you wanting to protect? And I would dare say that government policy and media rhetoric has guided us down that. We got to trap possums. We got to trap possums. Or we got to trap rats. We got to eradicate them by 2050. But in some places, do we? Do we actually? Are they having a negative impact? Is there anything there that we value? If it's a wasteland with nothing, sweet. We don't value. There's nothing in their value. If it's a best fence somewhere else. So having all of those kōrero really help the whānau hapu iwi ahatu that I'm working with. Get an understanding of let's just not just do it because the government says to do it. Let's do it because we want to protect something, and it helps them investigate some of their kōrero tupu or their knowledge as well.
Kia ora. Another from Wayne here. Do you see pasture as a pest?
Oh, another good question. And it depends as well. Farmers would say that's one of their best assets is pasture. Whereas if we know for forest ecology, if you get a bit of pasture in there, that just becomes a breeding ground for blackberry, gorse, basically the worst things, worst plants that you could have. If there's a bit of grass in there, they'll occupy and straight in. So it depends on the area and it depends on the reason. Sounds like I'm trying to dodge questions, and hara mo te karo I te nuinga o te wā. Engari, kei te āhua tonu o ngā pātai katoa. It depends on all these pātai.
Yep. And very contextual, and as you were saying, based on what you were just saying there, whether what might be considered a pest in one area might have no effect somewhere else. So I suppose it's about having the kōrero in the community and identifying the priority on a scale of 1 to 10. How is this really a pest here? Is it really a pest? Like, say, you wouldn't have that example. You wouldn't really have that issue up north because the deer, for example, there aren't that many deer up there as opposed to somewhere like Gisborne where it's concentrated area of just inaccessible land, te Rānei. So, Te Hatu Boat, you mentioned that we need to be able to scale up and find innovative ways of pest control to achieve predator-free 2050. Do you have any thoughts on how Māori approach can be scaled up?
Ooh. Well, in the first instance, what I've seen with this mātauranga approach is engagement. More Māori communities are willing to have a conversation around pest management if it can involve their way of doing it. Which, if we're going to scale up, we need people to, it's no use inventing the best tool in the world if no one wants to use it. So first and foremost, I think mātauranga is, or investigating these approaches, helps build the number of people that want to do pest control in a different way. And what is a Māori way? Gene editing's on the cards. It's on the horizon. So is that a Māori approach? Koe au ki te ki. And some of the gene editing, the conceptual stuff that's it's a lot different to genetic modification from the early 2000s. Gene editing is where they can alter a specific DNA site. And so, for instance, blue eyes, it could go into me, change my DNA so my children have blue eyes, but that trait becomes dominant. So their children have blue eyes and so on and so forth. How it's going to be weaponized is they alter a couple of possums' DNAs so they only produce females or males. Let's say females. They only produce females, and then they only produce females. So, and because it's a dominant trait, it's passed on to all of the offspring after a while. So after multiple generations, you're just left with females and nothing else, and then they collapse. So conceptually, could work, I don't know. But ethically, is that Te Ao Māori? Is it a Māori approach? Is me using stainless steel traps or galvanized traps a Māori approach, even though I used metalberry? Well,
here's another one, Boat. Is it feasible to tie kia now? Any harm to the plants?
Oh, from what I understand, no. You might need to check with a proper plant ecologist or someone who knows this stuff. Yeah, but from what I understand now, and they're pretty robust stuff. So we used to, when I was doing track cutting, we used to lay into them with machetes, and next season they'll be back. So they're pretty hardy.
Oh, ka another comment that was made was culture might be able to adapt more quickly than Te Ao. What say you, sir?
Yes and no. Again, I'm not trying to dodge the pathway or trying to wriggle out of it, but COVID, for instance, was a great example of how our culture could pivot or could adapt, and it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was changing for the worst. It was changing because it was preservation of life. We needed to, okati ngā hongi, so no more hongis. Let's wash our hands, or hariru. So we were able to spin within a few days. So roadblocks, that seems like the opposite of manaakitanga, turning manuhiri away. But again, it was to preserve life. So our culture was able to shift really quickly. So when the need or the driver is big enough, our culture can shift, and it's always changing anyway. Any kōrero around tikanga and kawa is changing all the time. So if we're staring down the barrel of extinction for some of our taonga species, is that a big enough driver? No, I'd like to think so, but unfortunately, with a lot of our species here in Aotearoa, they're long-lived, especially trees. So, for instance, a lot of our forests are 50 to 100 years old type thing. So if you make a change now to them, you won't see the impacts until 50 years' time. Whereas if it's in your face, you're more likely to do something. So, yeah.
And I suppose the other thing is, how trying to get our tamariki involved, as opposed, like now, all our rangatahi involved now, as opposed to technology, or maybe even trying to show them the correlation between the two, so that they are involved, because they're not actually, in some instances, as a kaiako, because from me being a kaiako, in my background, there were unless you were doing PE, everything else was sort of more or less based in just the classroom, and like slightly extended from that context, but not so much into rākau and how it plays a huge role on our everyday lives, and the sustainability of things like of these taonga was hardly ever mentioned in anything else, unless you were taking maybe, but even biology was actually quite limited when discussing these matters. But has there been much thinking done around the best order to control introduced pests by utilising our native species? For example, lower the possum numbers and rat numbers so that the tawa can start fruiting again and draw the pigs into the bush for the season. Then lower the pig numbers.
Yeah, so I don't know about that specific example, but whakaaro has been given, if you would take out all the stoats, let's say, you'll have a rat plague. So how do we go about it in a strategic way? And second of all, again, I think this was Tumai's whakaaro, Tumai Cassidy. And I should mention as well, Tumai is 19. He's my tuakana in a lot of this mahi. So a lot of people think, if you're older, you're wiser. Not the case. That guy's a living legend. He was saying, let's not wait till we get to 2050, and then we start looking at, how can we harvest kereru, or how do we get them back to being healthy? How do we tie everything in now so we control the pests, build up the numbers, and start bringing back mātauranga? So put it this way, people are more likely to control pests if it means they can catch manu right now. And that's just a theory of mine. So how do we utilize that, those philosophies of cultural and sustainable harvest as well as pest control? Hopefully that answered the part.
Another one here, bro. How realistic is the predator-free 2050 kaupapa? Is it feasible or desirable? Does it validate the use of control measures that we generally wouldn't use, like 1080?
Oh, good question. And I suppose if we're going to talk about a Maori approach, if we go down the route of tumatauenga, all's fair in love and war, if we're going to go to war with possums, going back to the first part of the apartheid, is it achievable? I always say this tongue in cheek, but we could achieve it right now if we just nuked everything, if we just 1080'd everything. But that's not socially acceptable. So we do need a lot of technological advances, and we need more buy-in, or the pest management system needs more buy-in. That being said, I think it's Alberta in Canada. It's a territory, and I think it's like three or six times the size of New Zealand, but they're rat-free. And they've got a lot working for them. Basically, rats never got there, and so what they did is they just built a wall of traps that extends 100 kilometres wide. So the rat has to get through all of these traps type thing before it can get into the country. But if it does, it's unlikely to find a mate, and so it will just die. And they've got really hard winters, so a lot of rats run indoors for the winters, and they've got traps indoors. But they've also got a culture that if anyone there sees a rat, they know to get on top of it. Right, call up, I thought I saw a rat, and the government comes in. So is it achievable? Yes, we just need some technological advances. Is it sustainable? Yes, we just need a culture where we're like, oh, I saw a possum, we need to get rid of it. So in 2075, let's say, our moko Puna at that stage, they're like, no, we don't want those things here.
Yep. Another one here, bro. Historically, Maori manage and protect natural resources. For example, only harvesting kai at a certain time of year. Are there any kōrero about Maori tupuna controlling pests back in the day? For example, once kiore numbers got out of control, or was pest control a fairly modern concept?
That's a good question, and that's what I'm trying to ask myself. So I don't have a answer or the answer. But our tupuna, for kiore, for instance, they managed them to a certain level, but never over harvested. So it wasn't a case of just total eradication or annihilation. They live with the environment, and so I like to say, rather than say live with the environment, they survived in the environment. So they knew they knew what they could and couldn't do to the environment, to natural resources. And if they overstepped those boundaries, if they took too many, they starve next year, and ko te tangata tetu, someone would die, or there'd be misfortune or ill health. So I like to think of our mātauranga as being, it was tried and tested for a certain time. So I use it as the basis of pest control, because the current pest control doesn't, our tupuna would never go out and eradicate something. It just wouldn't make sense. It would be, it wouldn't make sense. And they'd probably, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, or a better way to say it, but ultimately, current pest management and our traditional ways of harvesting, which could be seen as pest control, just don't really align. So hopefully that answered the question. I don't think it did.
Because I just saw parallels in that, and something that I read as well by Wee Maihi when he spoke about how they would rotate particular bays. So you wouldn't wash your hands, you wouldn't wash the blood. So when our warriors would return from battle, they wouldn't wash in the same bay that they would harvest kokopu and kaura from, but they won't keep those the same. So they would rotate after a while, and they say this place is particularly ki te whakanoi te tangata, ki te horoi, ki te harane. The next bay is for your kaura, but they didn't keep those in the same areas all the time. They rotated those areas, and I saw that as a means of being able to control your food sources at the same time, and then it preserved whatever was there at some time. Then it sort of had that balance, which is exactly what sort of some of what Moana has spoken about in this in our pātai. She's mentioned that motaku he ko ki mai o Moana, tapu was applied when an imbalance occurred in the community. So yes, our people were able to make changes when needed, talking about tai ao and community. Nō reira, tēnā koe Moana i tērā kōrero, and noa occurred when balance was achieved, so our people were awesome, which is another comment that was that I thought was very valid in our kōrero. Another one here, bro, was We are a marae doing a lot of pest control and have trained rangatahi for these works. How do we set up a contractor and go through procurements?
Oh, I mean, if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's pretty straightforward, but I feel like there's a lot of support in there. And it would be remiss of me to not shout out to my wife, Kahurangi. She helps set up my business, but she also works for Amotai. So if anyone, I don't know their website name, but if you want to message me, I'll pass you on to them. They're helping Maori businesses, so she can put you in touch with people that can help set up the business part of things. What I will say though is that we need more Maori in this space, I reckon, especially with a lot of these pest management initiatives in Maori on Maori-owned land or within iwi constructs. And so government at the moment, with the Maori caucus in place, all government agencies really want to partner well with Maori. So now's the time. So if you've got the people there, you're 90% of the way there. Setting up a business is the easy part. I will also say as well, just following on from that, the best biodiversity is on Maori-owned land. So, and some would argue it's because Maori haven't developed their land, but when what is developed for us, if there's taonga species there, it's developed. So Maori know how to protect our taonga species. So yeah, who better than mana whenua to do pest management?
Another one here, ideas on showing the benefits from pest trapping. So, for example, what are the mātauranga indicators that you look for to identify progress, and how do you show that innovatively to whānau who may not be able to go out into the ngahere? Pest control has to be about more than just killing numbers.
Yes. No one measures how many they killed. So when we talk about pest control, it's how many you left in the bush is the dangerous part, because the ones you've killed aren't going to do any damage. And when you were talking before about the kura kids, we've got to engage them.
Yep.
Now, when in terms of telling the story, is how I like to put it. Wellington they put a vote out, shall we do predator-free Wellington? And I think it was something like 95% said yes, 4% said maybe, and 1% said no, which is stupid numbers. You never, if you got 95% on a test, you'd be stoked. 95% yes, said yes, and they put that down to that most of these people are seeing kaka and tui every day because of Zealandia. And I think Aria is watching tonight. She's online, and if you want to talk to anyone at Zealandia, talk to Zealandia or Zealandia? Zealandia, I think. The place in Wellington. It's a bird sanctuary, and basically the birds are overflowing and going into Wellington. So people in Wellington can see the benefits of pest management. There's a kaka on their doorstep, so they're like, oh man, we've got to do more of this stuff. So for some of us who are just starting out, so for us in Rotorua, for instance, we're just starting our journey. So it'll be a while before we see any great numbers or we see kaka or kōkako. So we've got to have something that will keep us interested. Luckily for us in Te Arawa, we've got Mokoia Island, which is a bird sanctuary. So we could go across there and basically wake up to the deafening sounds of the dawn chorus. But we've also got kōkako. So it is about showing the benefits of the stuff, even though it might be a while before we see it.
And one more here, Bo, is over the weekend we discussed successful fauna eradication has meant introduced flora are now colonising a wāhi. For example, the awa or ngahere edges. Have you found it important to have inclusive eradication cycles?
Yeah, got to be a holistic approach as well. Like anything, you touch one thing in the ngahere and it has an impact on everything else. So, and that's where our tupuna were brilliant at it. They knew that they could look at a tirairaka and tell you about the whole forest, because that tirairaka is eating insects at this time, and those insects are doing this for the environment, and that means this is happening. Those insects could be eating the bark of a tree, which means that there's a lot of fungi around. So just by seeing one bird, our tupuna would say, give you an idea of what the forest was doing at that time. That being said, if we do, like I said, if you do one thing, you trap your possums. something else will take over. You might find the possum was controlling another thing. So you've got to have a deep understanding of the forest, of your forest, before you go down that track. And that's where my understanding and my knowledge falls short. Is I just know possums and rats. And that's why I'm in envy and awe of some of our tupuna who knew all this stuff, because I know this much and I know I don't know this much. And then there's probably a whole, this whole room full of knowledge if I only know this much. So trial and error. And unfortunately, if it does mean like plant species coming and taking over, how do you balance it out?
Good. Brilliant. And one more, bro. One more here is, what is your opinion on what is your opinion on central governments and council proposed SNAs, so significant natural areas on Maori land, and how do you see this impacting pest control?
Like I said, that most of the biodiversity is declining at a lesser rate. Is better on Maori-owned land. So biodiversity is better on Maori-owned land. And as we know, the government has an atrocious history and track record for managing biodiversity. So it doesn't make sense for them to say, hey, we can, you should lock it up and do this because we say. We're already doing something good, so it should be the other way of anything. We should be, land should be going back to Maori so they can protect it. I think it's Aroha Me talks about this, and hopefully if she's listening, I'm sorry, I'm going to do this atrociously, but the UN classify natural, what is the word? Sites of significance, something like that, from a 1 to a 6. 1 being lock it up and throw away the key, and that way everything's protected. 6 being people live in that area, but the conservation values are still protected. The taonga species are still protected. Of all the 6s, it's the indigenous people that are living there. And like I said before, our tupuna knew how to live within the environment or survive within the environment without having a negative impact on the environment. They just knew how to live safely within it while still taking from it. So it doesn't make sense for us to go lock it up and throw away the key to protect it when our tupuna were more than capable of doing it. So why don't we look at those things? So in terms of significant natural areas, I don't know a lot about the policy, but I feel like if they are going to do something in that space, it should be asking Maori, hey, what can we do? O ngā iwi Maori katoa. What should we do in your here, Ngāpuhi? What should we do in Te Arawa? And even different. Ngāti Pikiao, what should we do? Go a kilometre down the road, Ngāti Tarāwhai, what should we do?
Kia ora. And this is one of those pātos, but are we making all of this mātauranga bite-sized for our tamariki and appealing to kids how we can integrate it into mātauranga, because they're already at school, they already have to do all of that. How do we integrate this so that we look at almost like a succession plan of this mātauranga? And if all this mātauranga was so accessible, I don't know why we didn't know it already. So it mustn't be that exposed, I suppose. How do we increase the exposure to a bird just before we knock off?
I think some people are already doing it, eh? Like the likes of yourself, Mataia Kepa, Te Aorere Pewhairangi, that grow up with that philosophical, deep understanding of our culture, and then so that's already sort of protecting it and encouraging it. And then you've got people like myself with a practical background who, I went back to sort of learn real. I thought I knew how to speak Māori when I left school, but wow, I was wrong. So I went back to learn real, and that's where I started touching on some of this stuff. And so I've gone back to school to learn more about that stuff. So I'm going from a practical sense to this theoretical, philosophical space that you guys have been occupying, and I'm like, wow, there's so much knowledge in there. So I think it's about marrying up those two sort of guide, and you know that you'll be doing it yourself with the hunting, that there's mātauranga that you just know innately, but you don't realize it, or you're just like, oh, okay, I thought that was everyone knew it. Te Aorere talks about a lot of it when he does his diving, that some of the kupu he uses has, like, he says tupou power, and that, that could indicate that you're just bending down for power, you weren't diving for power. And that would also tell me that the power were at such a number that if you did have to dive, you're doing something wrong, you need to move to the next area. So one little kupu, and like you're saying about the whanga, we wash your tinana, but I do want to talk to more teachers on this because I'm not a teacher. I can barely wrap my head around this stuff as it is, but that's where I reckon teachers are invaluable. If teachers want to get paid double, triple, I'm all for it, because if they can take this stuff and feed it to our tamariki, it just means our culture is protected, our mātauranga is protected, and hopefully our forests are protected.
Kia ora pai, tika pai. Well, we're looking forward to all the hua of your mahi pai. Tēnā koe your Maori whakai, kia hora mai ngā mātauranga ai tēnei pōnei. All the best for your in your rangahau, and a win in your rangahau is a win for all of us, my bro, as it's reinstating and revitalising again, replenishing our ngahere with the mātauranga that you are going to bring our kaupapa. Nō reira, e taku huanga, I'll be in touch shortly with our hunting posse for in the very near future for purely research purposes. Research purposes, just to see where we need to focus our trapping on. Hewa no taku whanaunga, tēnā koe i o kōrero i tēnei pōtira, tēnā koutou katoa i tauma i tēnei pō, ki te kai ngā kai kei anaringa. Homa, kia manahau te pō, tēnā koutou, mā te wā. Kia ora mā pai.
Kia ora.